on here. That theme music was my intro to you, because some of you who might be visiting are asking, what is a Webby? And so my name is Webster, and my mama nicknamed me Webby, and that is with a Y, not an I-E. I'm not Debbie, okay? But I am so privileged to sit before you and preach today. What an awesome experience it is to think and to contemplate the word of the Lord. In the book of Hebrews, there's a simple scripture, and it says, we have this hope that is an anchor for the soul, the Zoe that we've been preaching about just in this series of the Gospel of John. Firm and secure. And if you're like me, with all of the stuff that I've been through in my life, firm and secure sounds pretty neat. Because what that tells me is that there is a certain power in hope. I don't know if you've ever been in a hopeless situation. But to be hopeless is to not have anything on your mind or your heart that is looking forward, that is positive, that is energetic. It is a disastrous thought to be hopeless. And so there is a certain power in hope. Jesus was crucified. He died on the cross. He was buried in a tomb. And God's power of hope raised him from the dead. Because if you are in this room this morning, or maybe live streaming, or you're walking by and the Holy Spirit takes it and throws it on the street, the thing about this hope is that Jesus is our only hope. And when we consider that, John has said to us all through his gospel, I'm trying to get you to understand, people, believe in Jesus. Frank has brought that out in every one of his sermons in this series. And we've been trying to dissect verse by verse John's gospel in order that we might grow as disciples. And I told the early service, this has been a fantastic study for me personally. And if you aren't getting anything out of it, then you aren't listening. You are not ready to hear the hope that Jesus has for you. And that's my prayer today. You see, the religious elite we have discovered in this study, they want Jesus dead. And they want him dead at any cost. And they were looking for a way to accuse him of something that would get him arrested so that they could put him to death. Oh yeah, these are the preachers of the day, by the way. These are the ones that live thinking, wanting everybody to think that they're God's men. And yet they want to take the life of this itinerant prophet preacher. And that's outstanding, don't you think? They figured if we do something to him that has something to do with the law of Moses, yes, that'll do it. That will do it. So they contrive a trap to catch him. And so what sin deserves stoning? The law of Moses, pretty strict. There were certain sins that called for capital punishment. And stoning was one way to accomplish it. Let's read the story from John, the 8th chapter. I want to read one verse of chapter 7. Then each went to his own home. They had tried to trap Jesus in the story from last week. They could not. It has gotten late. They go home, and here's what John says Jesus does. Jesus went to the Mount of Olives, one of his special places. At dawn, he appeared again to the temple courts, where all the people gathered around him, and he sat down to teach them. The teachers of the law and the Pharisees brought a woman caught in adultery. They made her stand before the group and said this to Jesus, "Teacher, this woman was caught in the act of adultery. In the law of Moses, we are commanded to stone such women. Now, what do you say?" They were using this question as a trap in order to have a basis for accusing him. But Jesus, he bent down and he started to write on the ground with his finger. When they kept on questioning him, he straightened up and he said to them, "If any one of you is without sin, let him be the first to throw a stone at her." Wow. At this, again he stooped down and wrote on the ground. And at this, those who heard began to go away one at a time. The older ones first, until only Jesus was left with the woman still standing there. Jesus straightened up again and asked her, "Woman, where are they? Has no one condemned you?" "No, sir." She looks around. "Then neither do I condemn you," Jesus declared. "Go now, and you leave your life of sin." A huge contrast between Jesus, the Son of God, and the Pharisees and the religious leaders. I mean, the starkness of the contrast is unbelievable, really, because you see, critics seek to build up self and to tear down other people. That's what a critic does. And usually a critic has an agenda. And their actions, let there be no mistaken idea about this. Their actions were not about the law of Moses, nor were they concerned at all for this woman. You see, Jesus desires to rescue sinful people. That's why he gives people hope that are feeling hopeless. If sin has a grip on your life this morning, let me remind you, which would you rather have? Would you rather have the love and the mercy and the grace and the forgiveness of Jesus, or a rock upside of your head? I think it's a no-brainer. No pun intended. I would accept the arms of Jesus going around me better than I would accept a rock being thrown at me. What about you? In John 7, Frank reminded us in that story that the readers could not lay a hand on him, because the way it's worded in John in chapter 7, it says, because it was not time yet. See, God has time involved in his plan. And let me caution you, there's a lot of you, maybe even in this room, that are waiting for something. You actually don't know what it is, except maybe you want to hang on to what you're into. Because God will have a time for you personally to do something about your life in a way that will be transformative for you. If sin has a grip on your life, why wait? I think Jesus did something outstanding here. When they couldn't lay a hand on him, and they sent the guards, as Frank told us last week, and the guards went back and said, this guy's different. You didn't arrest him? No. Well, how could we? I mean, they were bowled over by Jesus. Did he go hide? No. Did he get out of town so that he wouldn't be arrested? Nuh-uh. Did he disguise himself so no one would see him? No, no, no. Not at all. Verse 2, at dawn, Jesus appeared again in that temple court. He walked right back to teach the people. You see, they were always trying to set a trap, and they were looking for that basis for accusing Jesus. They landed on adultery, a very serious crime, and stoning was the punishment. Let me fill you in on something. Stoning was the punishment if at least two witnesses not seeing her go into the Motel 6 with a guy, not even maybe laying on the same bed he's on, you had to actually witness the act of adultery. Whoa. You see, it's not about the rumor mill. It's not about, well, maybe that's what they were doing. It had to be somebody that saw them in the act. I read a lot of commentators on this subject, and the majority of them sort of thinks this might have been staged a little bit. That they didn't care about this woman except they knew her and her reputation, and so they used her. They set this up, and it could be that one of her accusers was standing right there in the midst with a rock in his hand. Teacher, this woman was caught, there it is, in the act of adultery. Observation. I've said it 3 times now. They did not care about this woman, except they wanted to use her for their own agenda. They didn't really care about the law of Moses either, because they didn't keep other laws that Moses had. They made her stand in front of the whole group that had gathered just to humiliate her and make it look a little more dramatic. So they used the law to try and trap Jesus. Was this woman sinful? Yes. Guilty. You see, the spiritual leaders should have had one thing in mind. How can we restore this person? How can we give her God's love? Rather than go by the rule that says she should die. Particularly if they contrive the whole thing. When it comes to mercy and grace, they had no intention of saving her. She was guilty. They didn't ask for any testimony. They didn't ask for any trial. They didn't bring her to the Sanhedrin. The law of Moses said, stone her. And there they stood with the rocks in their hands. So they asked Jesus a question to trap him. Jesus, what do you say about this? See, Jesus was a threat to their personal gain, to their exploitation, to their control and their power. And that's all that really mattered to them. But I want you to be careful right here, because this same kind of thing can happen even in the church body. At times, we too can be good at pointing out the sins of others, as Frank reminded us a moment ago at the table. And we ignore our own. Sometimes to advance our own agenda. Isn't it ironic? Sinners judging sinners. Pointing fingers without dealing with our own sin. Sinners that sometimes don't like somebody's skin color, the clothes they wear. You know, real serious stuff like the type of car they drive. Maybe they have a little accent that you say, well, you're not from around here, are you? I get that a lot. Athleticism. Well, that person can't walk and chew gum at the same time. That always really offended me. They don't sound like they're very educated. Oh, their musical ability, I don't think they played that or sung that like they should. I mean, I think somebody else could have done better. Their religious background, and on and on and on, so it can happen. But these guys are saying this is going to work because we're using the law of Moses, and it's a hard-clad law, and nothing can go wrong. We have him now, basically. You got to wonder what motivates people who show no mercy and grace, no love and no kindness. I do believe if you look for somebody's motive, you'll find that what Jesus is really all about is the heart. He's about the Zoe. He wants us right on the inside because he knows if we're right on the inside, we're going to be better on the outside. There's no doubt about that. You see, the religious leaders that had brought this woman in, they would discard her in a skinny second. It wouldn't matter to them at all. In fact, they would drag her on out and stone her, and that would be the end of it, and they'd go home. Good day's work. We protected God from this sinful woman. For us, you see, we have two choices all the time. Am I going to listen to me? Or am I going to listen to Jesus? I don't know about you, but if I listen to me, I'm going to stay in trouble some way, somehow. So we have Jesus' words and how he thinks about people, and it's compassion and it's restoration. And I would ask you to think clearly about who cares about you. And I would submit to you that Jesus cares about you more. Truth is, sin cannot be ignored. Whether it's my sin or I'm pointing at somebody else's sin, it can't be ignored. The damage it causes cannot be minimized. Sin is offensive to an almighty God. In fact, God cannot be in the presence of sin. And the adultery in this story is offensive. But so is the malice and the arrogance and the ignorance of the Pharisees, using the sin of another person for gain and ignoring their own. God help us not to be like that. Verse 7. Jesus acted like, started writing in the sand, ignoring them. Then verse 7 says, that they continued to question him. Like, what do you think, Jesus? What do you think? We've asked you a question. Aren't you going to answer us? Won't you give us the respect of answering our question? They're poking at him, and he's ignoring them. And what they've learned in this little incident, when he straightens up, look out. When they kept questioning him, he straightened up and said to them, if any one of you is without sin, let him be the first one to throw a stone at her. Well, according to the custom of stoning, whoever made the accusation had the privilege of throwing the first rock. But guess what that would have exposed? It would have exposed the man who's not mentioned at all here. He would have been the guilty one in front of everybody. It would have ID'd him in a heartbeat. So it really got quiet. Kind of like this is. And all you could hear was the dull thud as the rocks hit the sand. And then the shuffling of the flip-flops as the older men started out first and then everybody followed. Woman, where are they? She's looking around. Jesus says, has no one condemned you? Not one, sir. Then neither do I condemn you. Go now and leave your life of sin. In other words, sin no more. You have dodged a stoning today. I have shown you compassion with my words and my actions. Now change your life. See, that's what Jesus does for us. He not only tells us to change our lives, he gives us a great example of how to do that. So why don't we just check our hearts? Now, I'm not talking about you going to a cardiologist. That would be bios. What I'm talking about is we need to check our Zoe. That word for our soul here. Number one, throwing stones will not take away sin, but the love of Jesus will, right? We can condemn all we want to, and we can punish, but it won't change the thing that needs to be changed. Anger and unforgiveness harms you, and it harms others. I've got a line in the Wednesday night class. I'm gonna throw it out there. I hate to use it now, but it's like the old saying. It's like you drinking poison and waiting for the other person to die, because they've offended you. But Jesus says, forgive them. And he says not only that, but in Matthew he says, if your forgiveness is not pretty good, guys, I'm not going to forgive you. That's hard. To the same measure will be your forgiveness. So what gets in the way of most of us loving folks back to Jesus is unforgiveness. We need to check our hearts. Thirdly, let your goodness exceed the actions of others. We don't have to be like everybody else. In fact, we have claimed we're not. We're Christians. We're disciples of the King of Kings, the Lord of Lords. So we are different. Check your heart, am I? 4, forgiveness can help broken people mend. You know how I know that? Because that's what helped me mend. It was the forgiveness Jesus gave me and that started to change my ways. Lastly, this story is no excuse for us to sin. Oh, well, Jesus forgave her. He'll forgive me too. No, he says, go and change your sinful life. That's the challenge. It's not that somebody else was forgiven. It's that I am called to change. So has sin got a grip on your life today? Come ask God to forgive you. Are you troubled by someone who's wronged you? Let it go. Is it worth your peace of heart and mind, your health? So I challenge you today. Before I challenge you, I want to read something to you. And I'm praying right now that there it is. There's a lady that was in the church I left in Georgia named Joni Grimm. Last night, Joyce and I were sitting after the Georgia Bulldogs beat the dog out of Tennessee. I just had to mention that a little bit, but Janet Meek, one of our very, very devout, mission-minded people in this congregation, she sent this out yesterday. And Joni Grimm is she's in her early 90s, I think now, maybe, Janet? Close to it. But one day she decided God was telling her to go to India, so she packs up and goes by herself. She got all kinds of bed bugs and diseases. She stayed in hotels she shouldn't have stayed in. But Roger Knipe, who heads up a great Kerala mission in Kerala, India, that we support, there's over almost 100 churches in that part of India now because of Rajan. And he's preaching the gospel, and Joni Grimm's the reason he came to the U.S. and went to Bible college and went back home and started converting family and friends. She writes this, and I tie it in, and it doesn't fit perfect, I'll promise you. But what it does say to me about is our heart. Do I really care about people who need Jesus? That woman that day, she needed Jesus and she got him. Here's what Joni writes. On one of my many trips to Kerala, India, as I waited for Roger Knight to pick me up, I saw a man lying on the step of the hotel. He was wearing the black shirt of a Hindu. One of his flip-flops had fallen off. His head lay propped on his arm, and I assumed he was sleeping. When I returned to the hotel that evening, the man was still lying there. He had hardly moved. I had a very busy day doing wonderful things for the kingdom, and I was hot, and I was tired, and I was hungry. I needed to take care of Joni. I gave no thought to the man on the step. Next morning, the man was still there, but I was in a hurry, and Rajan had arrived. I did not have time to worry about the man. Besides, I had great things to do I needed to do for the Lord, and I left the man sleeping, undisturbed. When I returned that night, he was still on the step. But again, I was hot and tired and hungry, and I hurried inside because I needed to take care of me. The next morning, the man was gone. I walked down the street where a Christian friend had been selling tea all night from his tea cart. I asked Gabriel, what had become of the man on the steps? Gabriel said, he died. And the death wagon came early this morning and took his body to the river with others for burning. Joni writes, I was shocked. He died. He probably just starved to death, Gabriel said. Many people in India are born on the street. They live in the street and they die in the street. I had passed this man 4 times in the last 2 days. I had Indian rupees in my purse, and just across the street were vegetables, fruit stands, and bread. I could have fed the man. Why didn't I feed him? Oh, well, you say you didn't know he was starving. That's true. But why didn't I know? Why didn't I know? I didn't know because I never asked. And why didn't I ask? Because I didn't care enough to stop and ask. I was too busy doing God's work. Guys, we are on mission. And there are people who are dying of spiritual starvation all around us. Like the woman caught in adultery, trapped in a sinful lifestyle, Jesus released her. Here's what I would like us to do to end today. Praise team's coming out. They're going to sing another song. During that song, if you've got something on your heart and your mind, come pray. Come kneel in prayer before the Lord. Talk to Him about it. Oh, I know it's a little embarrassing to get up and have people think you might have something going on. And you really don't want to let go of it, do you? Here's a place, a time, a moment that God holds. This moment right now will be gone in a little bit. And once again, some of us will pass it by and say, I ain't doing that. Why don't we give our stuff to the Lord? Father, help us to be real with you, to be honest about who we are. Thank you for Jesus that took time to be wise enough to reach out to this woman that was in a bad situation. Lord, give us the courage of our convictions that we might come before you in honesty and prayer.